Morning, everyone. Ready to start now. Sorry for the delay. We were hoping that everyone who's having a problem finding parking is able to find it. So they're on their way, but we'll start. So hello and a very warm welcome to the South Asian Literature and Art Festival, or SALA, as is popularly known, proudly produced by Art Forum SF. This festival is special because you chose to be here to listen and to celebrate South Asian voices. A heartfelt thank you to all our sponsors for making this Literature and Art Festival a reality. The dedication to supporting writers, artists, and the exchange of ideas keeps creativity alive in our community. Quick housekeeping rules. Please silence your phones and no recordings. Everything will be on YouTube later so you can enjoy and relive the brilliance at your own pace. Also, please make sure while you're leaving not to leave any of your belongings or water bottles. There will be a 15 minutes Q&A after the session, followed by book signing by the author in the Florence Moore courtyard by the bookstore. And lastly, as a volunteer-run organization, we at SALA are deeply grateful to all our volunteers without whose support none of this would be possible. So let's dive in. Open our hearts and minds and enjoy the stories that remind us how art connects us all. The topic of today's discussion is the raised bar, where keynote speaker Meenakshi Ahmed is in conversation with Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekaran. Little bit about Rajiv. Rajiv is a veteran journalist, author, and managing director at the Ames Project, LLC, collaborating with the Schultz Family Foundation to support innovative initiatives and foster greater opportunities for all. A former senior correspondent and associate editor at the Washington Post, he reported from over 36 countries, including stints as bureau chief in Baghdad, Cairo, and Southeast Asia. He co-authored the best-selling book For Love of Country with Howard Schultz and is author of Imperial Life in the Emerald City, and Little America. Rajiv is a Stanford graduate and has served as a public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And with that, let's welcome our panelists on stage.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out, and thank you to Sala for, I will say personally, for bringing me together this weekend with my longtime dear friend, Meena Ahmed. I was just told on the way up here that I needed to introduce Meena, and I will say that, as an old friend, you're like, what exactly is on her CV? But I know that she's a proud graduate of the Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies in D.C., born in India. As you will read, hopefully all of you will pick up her book after this, came to the United States, initially to Massachusetts as a teenager, and is one of the most astute voices in my life, and I think of many others, when it comes to the subject of U.S.-India relations and more broadly, U.S. foreign policy and global affairs. Prior to writing her latest book, Indian Genius, she wrote a magisterial history of the long arc of U.S.-India relations titled A Matter of Trust, which garnered just an amazing rave review in the New York Times. So I think that book is also for sale, and we'll sprinkle in a little bit of foreign policy in this discussion because I just can't help myself. But all that said, I think the thing that on her CV that I hold most closely, and I'm sure this is on your CV, is that she is the godmother to my oldest son. So Meena, thank you for sitting here with me and with all of us today. This is a book that profiles some really phenomenal Americans of Indian descent who have gone on to achieve great success and, quite frankly, revolutionize our modern world in various ways. The contributions that individuals who Meena profiles in this book have made to the worlds of technology, medicine, in the worlds of law, politics, journalism, and beyond, have helped in many ways to shape the modern world that we live in today. But in some ways, this book is more than just a set of really amazing profiles woven together. It's at one level, it is a book about the power of immigration, and I think that's where I'd like to start today, because all of the principal characters you profile are folks who were born in India and immigrated to the United States. And this book begins really with setting that context. And I'd like you to help us frame this up. I mean, the way that waves of Indians arrived at moments of national need for our country to win the space race with the expansion of Medicare in the 1960s. There were, in 1970, 51,000 Indian Americans in our country. By 2020, that number has grown to 4.4 million. So I'd like to perhaps just start in a broad way, and then we can go down. But at the 30,000-foot level, what do these stories of geniuses in various disciplines taken together tell us about the value of immigration to the United States?
Sorry, we have to share a mic, so we're going to go back and forth. They didn't find a second mic. Thank you to Sala for hosting this wonderful festival celebrating South Asians. I'm really happy to be here. I just wanted to mention a couple of things about Rajiv, which wasn't said earlier. He wrote two phenomenal books when he was national editor of the Washington Post. One of them you may know because Imperial Life in the Emerald City became a movie called The Green Zone, which featured Matt Damon. So many of you may have seen it, and that made him pretty famous, and he also won the National Book Award. So anyway, I just wanted to add that in. He was sort of quite a celebrity in Washington, and aside from being a very, very highly regarded journalist. So back to immigration. You know, when this book came out, I was talking to someone in DC who was hosting a book event for me at a very famous bookstore in DC. And I said to her, I said, well, you know, if Kamala Harris had won, this book would have been even more resonant. And she said, oh no, given what Trump is doing with immigration, your book is really important because it's the counter-narrative to the immigration story that these guys are putting out. This is the counter-argument. And actually, given the way that this administration has rolled out its immigration policy, I actually think that's true. Because when it comes to all of us, to the Indian immigrants, when I came in 1970, as Rajiv pointed out, I came for college, and there were about 51,000 Indians here. There weren't that many of us. Today, there are close to 5 million. And 65% of the Indians in this country came after 2000, and they happen to be born in India, and the bulk of them have come after 2000. So. And it is based on the needs of this country as much as on Indians wanting to come here for opportunity. So let's just roll back to 1965 when the immigration policies of this country changed to allow immigration from India. Why did it change? It was driven by two very important things. One was domestic, one was international. Domestically, President Johnson passed the Medicare Act. 20 million Americans all of a sudden had access to health care. But at the same time, the AMA did not increase the number of medical students in the system. So the medical system didn't have enough doctors. At the same time, the Vietnam War happened, and there was a great need for both doctors to go to Vietnam as well as young people going to Vietnam who might have gone to medical school. So there was an immense shortage. And what did they do? They looked overseas for medical personnel and people who spoke English. They went to places like the Philippines as well, but they went to places like India and recruited Indians to come to this country to fulfill this need. On the international front, Sputnik had just happened. Many people in Silicon Valley will be familiar with this story. And the Defense Department freaked out because they thought, oh, the Russians are winning this space war, and we cannot have that happen. So they started investing heavily in MIT, in Caltech, and Stanford, and they needed engineers. There weren't enough American engineers, and that was the time when IIT was graduating a whole series of, engineering students who didn't have the opportunities in India, and they were ripe for being recruited to the US. And a whole lot of engineers came here. So these were highly qualified, highly skilled people that were coming into this country. So it was as much driven by a need in this country as it was by people looking for opportunities here. So don't let anyone tell you that it was a one-way street. It was not. If you're told by people, why are Indians here? Hand them my book. Let them know the contributions of the Indians. So, I will just, Rajiv actually pointed this out to me, as well as people like Abraham Verghese, who's spoken here before, who talk about this country, especially in the rural areas, would have been a medical desert if it weren't for the Indian doctors who are willing to go to places like Tennessee and willing to go to rural Appalachia to work. Because an American guy graduating from Harvard Medical School wasn't interested in doing that. So Rajiv, I'm going to give this back to you because you had some very interesting points on that.
I'll get to there in just 1 second. I would also note, in addition to rural parts of our country looking differently and health outcomes being very different for people in small communities across our country, the area that we're sitting in right now would be very different. This valley has been profoundly shaped by wave after wave of Indian immigrants, but all of that, I think, comes down, as you powerfully show us, to a cadre of trailblazers who, in some ways, opened the door over time, kind of cracked a glass ceiling, if you will. This was a wave of risk takers, and I'd love to talk about that a little bit with you. There's been a criticism of the Indian education system, particularly back in the 60s and 70s, of not really fostering creativity, fostering young people who excel in STEM fields, but perhaps not so much in the world of creativity. But for those who came here seeking opportunity, they took an enormous risk. And you note... one of the great details, and for those of a certain generation who came here in those years, you'll know that there were foreign currency exchange controls that India imposed that limited what somebody leaving the country could take out to $8 back then, called the $8 Club. I should just note, that my father, for many years, who came to this country in 1966 after graduating from IIT to pursue a chemical engineering master's, then PhD at Berkeley, was fond of telling me just showing how he sort of built a life here, that he showed up at the Greyhound bus terminal in Oakland with $28 in his pocket, which now is going to lead me to say, where the hell did you get that extra $20 from? But let's talk about the risk-taking here and what it took for this first wave to come.
Thank you. So, how many of you've all heard about the spelling bee? And how many Indian parents have, taken their kids to all these internal community spelling bee competitions before they get to the national spelling bee, and they sit with a danda over their children's heads, and they want them to study STEM. And, I looked into it. Actually, my publisher said, why don't you do the Indian Tiger Mom story? And I was like, that'll be a bestseller. And I thought, I'll go and I'll embed myself with these Indian parents and eat their dal roti, and they'll, take me in and embrace me. And then I'll write these really nasty things about them and how they raise their kids and put pressure on them. I'm not doing that. I said, no, they'll hate me. I said, no, that's for somebody else to write. And, but, I actually spent a few months doing research on the spelling bee kids, and looking up what does it take to become a genius, and do prodigies really, end up becoming geniuses? And I discovered, surprisingly, there's a very interesting book called The Genius Myth, and if you look at young prodigies, they actually they disappointingly don't become the Nobel Prize winners. And almost everyone I profile in my book, and you can ask some of them because a couple of my geniuses are right here. Kanwal Rekhi is here, Suhas Patel is here, sitting next to each other, $8 men. And they will tell you that their parents didn't get that involved in their education. They gave them the freedom to discover and to do their own thing. Kanwal's father wanted him to go to military academy. He didn't even know about IIT until he got in. And one of his, seniors his son didn't get in, and said to Kanwal, oh, your son got in. And then he discovered through somebody else that this was a very prestigious thing. So honestly, almost everyone to a T that I interviewed for my book, Vinod Khosla, you take any one of them, they all said their parents didn't have that much to do, didn't put pressure on them. So there's no real correlation. But risk-taking is a big factor. The ability to take risk is a big factor in being able to achieve and get to the top. You have to have the ability for risk. And so that is a key thing in these things. So what was your other question, Rajiv? I'm losing train of not being a genius myself.
Well, we'll keep on, and we'll come back to it. But let's...
And the $8 thing.
Yeah.
One thing I have to tell you, coming with $8 in your pocket, because I also came with $8 in my pocket, in my book, I have a story about Suhas Patel. You have to read it because it is absolutely hilarious, and it is touching, and it is so wonderful. But he describes his absolute anxiety about a plane change he had to make with only $8 in his pocket when he thought he was going to miss his flight connection, and how on earth was he going to get to MIT if he missed this connection? And with $8 in your pocket, it was a serious problem. So, since I just saw Asha walk in, I will mention her husband was a real genius. So, Mr. Motwani, everyone knows because he was such a genius in the Valley.
Meena, how do you define genius? And how did you choose your characters?
So, during the Renaissance and during the Romantic period, there was a lot of talk about genius being an innate thing. And And I think that those values have changed, where, sort of saying that someone was born a genius and those people were special, that is now politically incorrect. I think that may just still be true of mathematicians who generally achieve their genius before they're 30, and I think Rajiv Motwani is probably typical of that. He won the Gödel Prize at a very young age. But so that may be one genuine factor. But by and large, my book's title is a little provocative. It was titled that way, but it's really about the genius of the Indian people. And so there are a few geniuses in it, but I think now people have questions about what does genius really mean. There's a lot of, maybe it's just people who shine a little more brilliantly than people around them, but Malcolm Gladwell has a theory. If you spend 10,000 hours at something, anyone can play the violin perfectly, or anyone can do, something perfectly. Angela Duckworth has a theory that you have to have passion. Without passion, you're not going to achieve that level of genius. And maybe there's some truth to both, and maybe you have to have both. You have to have the passion, but you're not going to do it without the 10,000 hours. If you look at Bill Joy, or if you look at Bill Gates, or if you look at Steve Jobs, they certainly put in all those hours. They weren't going to achieve it without those hours. But they were obsessed. But you also had to have a passion. So I think there's a sort of combination of these factors. So I think it's a sort of subjective thing at this point. But one of the examples I like to use is Atul Gawande. So for example, Atul Gawande, with the Checklist Manifesto, he brought infection rates down by 60% in hospitals across the country. That was very transformative with a very simple idea. But there was a genius to it. And what he did was so transformational that, so some of the people ask me how I chose the people in my book. It wasn't just someone who was necessarily a sort of genius, but someone who had transformed the field that they were in. He transformed medicine. And then it wasn't just one idea, it was a second idea. He came up with this book, Being Mortal, about the end of life and death. And it was very influenced by being Indian and Eastern thought, but his book, Being Mortal, influenced the end-of-life care. And when you think of the fact that in this country, 90% of the cost of medicine is spent in the last 2 years of life, that approach, changing it and making it more holistic, and making medicine in this country open to holistic approach, that was transformational. Trying to change people's minds in this country is quite a phenomena. And I think, for the man to be able to do that was pretty amazing. And a lot of people ask me, why is Deepak Chopra in your book? And so I have a lot of reasons as to why Deepak Chopra is in my book. The reason everybody is doing yoga these days and every strip mall has a yoga place, thanks to Deepak Chopra, who is an endocrinologist and made it legitimate. But Rajiv has a great story. He is the one who convinced me to put Deepak Chopra in his book. And I will let him tell you the story as to why Deepak Chopra is in the book. And Rajiv, you tell the story when you were a reporter and you were traveling with this kind of Trumpian figure. Tell them the story.
So we're now turning the tables. I don't even know why I bothered to write notes on cards. Meena has taken the conversation as Meena will, which I love. So I'll give you the story, and then I want to circle back to genius for a second, because I'm not let you off the hook this quickly. This hopefully will be relevant when we come back and talk about Indian physicians. But as a young reporter for the Washington Post, I was out in the rural hills of Southern Virginia with a ATF agent who was pursuing moonshiners and illegal distilling operations, and we were on a stakeout in a kind of rural mountain community, and he was going through a bad divorce. ATF work was stressful, and as we're driving around in his government-issued Chevy Caprice, he pulls out a cassette and he puts it in the cassette player. And he's like, "You're Indian. You know who this is?" I had no idea. And it was a Deepak Chopra tape. And this federal agent, while on stakeouts, was listening to Deepak to get him to relax, to generate mindfulness in the most random place. And it was at that moment I realized that not just Deepak, but Indians in fields like medicine were crossing over into fully the mainstream. But story told, I want to come back to genius for a second, because I think my interpretation of this, and I may answer a little bit of the question I asked and have you build on it, is that the people you write about, they're all smart people, unquestionably. But they all have other amazing superpowers, right? The four people who are profiled in the world of medicine, Abraham Verghese, Deepak Chopra, Sid Mukherjee, Atul Gawande, all are phenomenal physicians and have moved medical science forward in various ways. But they all possess this remarkable gift of communicating with the wider world through writing, through speaking. And they could be geniuses in sitting in a lab, but what has made them transformative has been this other thing. And here in the Valley, these tech geniuses have not just been great tech geniuses, but they have possessed other skills. The Sundar Pichais, the Satya Nadellas up in my neighborhood in Seattle are also great business leaders, managers. But for them, it does come down to that first wave. And with Kanwal in the front row, in this place, I want you to take us to the kind of that first wave of kind of tech immigrants and entrepreneurs, and how they're geniuses, but they were genius entrepreneurs in some cases because that was there in their DNA, but in other cases out of necessity. Help us understand how that first wave really kind of blazed a trail for so much that would come later here in Silicon Valley and around the country.
Well, let's take Silicon Valley because we're right here. I call the early wave Kanwal, Suhas, who are sitting in the front row, and I feel odd telling their story with them right here. I'll mention Rajiv. He's not in the book because he passed away, but he would have been. And Vinod to a degree as well. These people who came in what I call the first wave, no one had their back. They were huge risk takers. They came here with their $8. They had no contacts. They came on their own. And I call them inventors and founders because they were the ones who paved the way for the later crowd. It is to them that the Satya Nadellas and Sundar Pichais owe a lot, and all the other startups that you see today. They're the ones who are the godfathers of this new generation, because when they came, they encountered roadblocks, discrimination, they had trouble raising money, because everyone thought of Indians as being the back office boys. But they took risks, and they set up their own companies, partly because it was a workaround from not getting promoted within the companies that they worked for. So they became both founders of their own companies and they were inventors. Suhas and Kanwal followed slightly different trajectories in the companies they founded. Kanwal had Indian partners, Suhas took on a white partner, but you can read about it in the book, I've described it. But they were both founders and very successful. And they then set up TIE, which you are all familiar with, that then helped spawn many, many other companies. And provided a network for these other companies to thrive. But more importantly, they proved that Indians could be managers. So by the time the next generation comes around, and Kanwal and Sundar and all these people, Sundar and Satya and all these people come from India, they come much later in the 1990s and after. Indian management has already become a proven factor in the valley. So all those things have fallen away, and it's much easier for these people to climb up the ranks and be considered for what is the highest position. So I call them the company men. They haven't actually founded the company, but they become really outstanding managers. And that's a whole different skill, but they have achieved a whole different level of achievement, which is not any less, but it's, they're running Fortune 500 companies, and they have brought a completely different management style. Everyone knows, and Bill Gates included, has admitted that he wasn't the nicest manager. I mean, it's all documented. But it was a toxic culture in some of these companies, and, they changed that. So I think, now let's see where things go, because diversity and all that was a big thing, and I think that may be changing a little bit now under this new environment. But
let me ask you the same question in the context of medicine, Meena. In some ways, Abraham Verghese, who went to the rural parts of Tennessee, and wrote so powerfully about not just his immigrant experience, but of treating patients with AIDS back when there was such stigma around it. And Deepak Chopra, who we've mentioned earlier, help us understand how they changed medicine for Americans, but also how they changed it for their fellow Indian physicians, and the way in which this kind of vanguard of Indian physicians, as they, some of them built their careers and served in small communities through their professional lives, but in the case of Abraham and Deepak, became public figures, public, intellectuals, people, best-selling authors. What did it do for Indians in the world of medicine in this country?
Can I turn the question back on you? You have a mother and a brother who's in medicine.
Just a brother.
Oh, okay.
I'm a failure. Let's just note that. My father has a doctorate. My grandfather has a doctorate. My great-grandfather had a doctorate. I should use past tense for everybody but my father. My wife has a master's. My mother has a graduate degree. My maternal grandmother has a graduate degree. But my father can proudly say, I have two sons, and among them, there are two doctorates, because my brother has two. Biochemistry from Berkeley, MD from Hopkins. I am I'm the lowly village idiot with just a bachelor's from Stanford. And it's not even in any sciencey field. Well, It's in political science. So, and I went into journalism. So, I'm very much the black sheep. We'll get to this generation and the ways that, this generation is excelling, and the ways this generation, or at least I like to think my generation. I was born in the 70s, just down the way at Stanford Hospital. Grew up in Palo Alto for the first 10 years of my life, so I was kind of coming back home. But the ways in which the American-born generation is excelling in different ways. But, when you spend a lot of time with some of these eminent Indian physician, author, public health individuals, and I should add there Vivek Murthy. It also gets added to that list, who is, has then transcended into the world of public service, serving as Surgeon General for 2 presidents, has been at the forefront of helping to really kind of capture the epidemic of loneliness that people are feeling in this country and the mental health challenges. But in ways like these successive generations of Indians have done in the Valley, Indians have helped to revolutionize, in some ways, medicine in our country. Most recently through the COVID pandemic. Help talk to us about the contribution that's made and how the characters in your book really help to embody that for us.
Well, we all know that, 15% of the doctors in this country are Indian. But in the rural areas, 40% of the doctors are foreign-born, and 50% of those doctors are Indian. So that's very high. So many people's first contact with an Indian is often through their physician. And that's usually a pretty positive thing. I think what's so wonderful about Sid, Mukherjee, and Abraham, and all of these people, is their ability to communicate. They have a platform, and they seem to reach very different people. So Sid's books on The Emperor of All Maladies, Cancer, The Cell, they're quite intellectual. They reach a very educated, intellectual group of urban elite, if you will. And whereas Deepak Chopra, I like to read all the books before I go and interview the people I interview. And so, Fareed had written 7 books, and Sid had written 3 or 4, but pretty big books. Deepak Chopra, I discovered, had written 90 books. I was thinking to myself, how am I going to read 90 books before I interview this guy? So I didn't read the 90 books, but I read, a few representative books, like maybe 10, before I went to meet him, and I found them actually reasonably compelling. So I actually called up Abraham, and I said, Abraham, I actually had my questions about Deepak being airy-fairy and, is this for real? But a lot of it is based on the Bhagavad Gita, and, it's actually quite compelling. And he said, Meena, he says, I agree with you, and I find Deepak quite compelling. And he said, I overlapped with him in Boston when I was a junior doctor, and he was a senior resident. And he was a very good doctor, and he said that he achieved success afterwards, and he says that there's some jealousy and all that, but he said he's actually a very genuine guy. And I got to know Deepak a little bit through my interviews and everything, and he's a really quite a humble guy, and he is a wonderful human being. And I would actually, if you've never read a book of his, and if you were sort of skeptical like I was, I would actually encourage you to read a couple of his books, because they're actually pretty wonderful. And and as Rajiv pointed out, it's not just the wives of Beverly Hills that he's appealing to, but this guy in rural Virginia doing a drug stakeout. So the importance of him is that he crosses quite a spectrum of people. Nikesh Arora told me about him too and said, oh, you must interview Deepak and you must include him and blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking, really? You too? You know? And so he has a following amongst a wide spectrum of friends. So, and I mean, I would be reading one of his books at a Starbucks and someone would come up to me, like, oh, you know, someone who worked there and said, oh, I really like him. I follow him. So yes, it's quite amazing how many people read him. So these people have a platform and they have a way of communicating and they reach different people. Vivek Murthy, I will tell you, is the sage of our time. When people ask me, out of all the people that you interviewed and have in your book and everything, is there anyone that really moved you? Now, that's an unusual question. Someone who moves you. I was at a book festival in Idaho, all-white audience, 1,000 people in the audience. I actually introduced him because I had interviewed him and I knew him. He gave a talk. It wasn't right or left. It wasn't political. It was spiritual. It was about people. It was about coming together as human beings. The talk was so moving. I turned around and I looked. People were bawling. I mean, people were crying. I mean, this was not an Indian audience. And it was a pretty conservative audience up in Idaho. And I can tell you, people were literally tears streaming down. And a lot of people came up to the festival organizers and said that was the most intense, wonderful experience they'd had. And that it was so moving that they all wanted to go out and do something in their community to bring this fractured country together. I mean, he's a very powerful person in a very soft, gentle way. And, you know, I asked him what he plans to do now because, you know, he's no longer Surgeon General. And he says, oh, I'm planning to work in a free clinic. And I said, oh, you're not going to make any money. And he was like, he doesn't think about it. He lives in a little rental apartment. And his wife works in a community clinic. So between the two of them, they make no money. And he really puts his money where his mouth is. And he has this idea that he wants to go around the country trying to heal people, trying to bring people together. It's, you know, I felt I was looking at, like, I mean, I'm exaggerating, Jesus Christ, but I mean, I felt like I was looking at a very spiritual human being. I mean, someone outwardly, and he's my kid's age. I mean, he's not quite 50. But he's so wise. He's a white hair, you know, but he's an amazing human being. So if you have a chance to go on YouTube and listen to something of his, I would. But he's a truly genuine person.
We just have a couple of minutes left, and I have a couple of more questions for you, so we're going to do this quickly. And the Vivek Murthy talk at Sun Valley is on YouTube, and Meena commends everybody to watch it. I want to move back away from science and medicine to my world for a second. Let's talk about Indians in politics. You know, if Trump stays in the White House through his term, there will have been somebody of Indian descent in the Naval Observatory, the vice presidential residence, for 8 straight years. I don't need to list all the names, but we do see prominent Indian Americans on the progressive kind of opposition, from Pramila Jayapal up in my neighborhood to Ro Khanna down here. Zohran Mamdani may be the next mayor of New York City. And then you see some very prominent Indian Americans on the MAGA right. You know, Kash Patel has been all over TV. You've had Bobby Jindal, others. Really, give me the 30-second answer. Why don't we see more Indian Americans in the political center?
Okay, since we're here, can I just mention the tariff case? Since we're talking about politics? That's not to hijack your question, but I was in New York 3 days ago on the panel on my panel were Neil Katyal and Sid Mukherjee. And Neil Katyal had won the tariff case in the appeals court. And as he was coming to the talk, he found out that the Supreme Court had accepted the case, and he's going to be arguing it in front of the Supreme Court. So he's in my book for a good reason. And obviously, this has really got under Trump's skin. And if he wins, if, it's a big if, because so far the Supreme Court has sided with Trump on a lot of stuff, but if he wins the tariff case, saying that, basically it says that it's illegal for Trump to impose the tariffs, that it's only Congress that can impose tariffs, and that it has to go to Congress. And you know, if that's the case, then all these tariffs, they'll have to pay back the countries that he's imposed tariffs on. It'll be good for India. But this relationship that I've documented in my previous book, you know, it was a prickly relationship for 50 years, from independence till Bush came, and then it took 30 years to wipe away the suspicions between the US and India. And then we were finally on a good trajectory, and Trump has really blown it up. And so it's not irretrievable, although I think in India, the tide has turned against Trump. It was, the FT put out a very interesting statistic about when Trump became president, about countries that were pro-Trump or against Trump, and almost every country had an attitude towards Trump that's positivity was between 30% and 60%, you know, Greece, Romania, you know, whatever country you took. India was an outlier, 80% pro-Trump in the FT. That was huge, and the U.S. has now squandered that because of the tariffs and because of things they've said about India, the personal insults about India being a dead economy, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, where do you go from here? There are a lot of naysayers in India that are saying, we told you so, we should never have trusted the U.S., and the question is, where do you go from here? It'll be interesting to see. We had a conversation about whether there was a better way of handling it. And I think there was a better way of handling it, because Modi could have given Trump some credit for the ceasefire. Without, I mean, since 1972, India has made it very clear they don't want any US involvement in the Kashmir issue or in the Pakistan issue. But what they could have done was say that they appreciated all the calls that the Trump administration made to put pressure on Pakistan to come to the table and come to a ceasefire agreement. That would not have taken anything away from India, but it would have been giving some credit to this administration. But anyway, now we're at a bit of an impasse. Let's see where things go from here. To get back to your question about why aren't there people in the center, we do have a few people like Raj Krishnamurthy, and there are some people. But I think with Bobby Jindal, one of the examples you took on the right, I think he saw an opportunity. I mean, I saw him as a bit of an opportunist. And I think he felt that by aligning himself, he changed his religion, he changed a whole lot of things. He felt he could rise within the party. In a place like Louisiana, you have to conform to the politics of the place, or you're not going to get anywhere politically. I think with Pramila Jayapal and Ro Khanna, I think they're just believers. I think they believe in they're part of the Democratic Party, but they also believe in what they say. I mean, why do you think that there's no central ground? You're a veteran journalist, you've covered Washington.
I'll tell you, I asked the question because I don't have a good answer. I do think that the success of the Indian American community does drive some Indian Americans to say, we've done well, but the system doesn't work for a lot of people, and it pushes them toward more progressive politics. And then you have others for whom the system has worked well for them, but they see overregulation, or they find themselves more kind of allied with conservative politics, and then have found a kind of an opening in the MAGA world. It's interesting that there's been, you see Indians in kind of having prominent voices on both sides. So I don't have a good answer. I'm still searching for it. I know we're at time, but my younger son wanted, we have a little stump you thing here, and it may be for some of the audience, but we're talking a little bit about prominent Indian Americans, and he's got one on his list, and he thinks this person. It's interesting, the individuals profiled here have been the world of technology, medicine, law, journalism. But there have been other fields where if you were writing a book about prominent folks from other countries, you might have other fields in America that would come in here. So his nomination for who he thinks like the coolest Indian American is today is a guy with Telugu grandparents named Kumar Rocker. Do you know who that is? Anybody? He's in the starting rotation for the Texas Rangers. Our first MLB Indian American pitcher. So, how many other, you write about so many other groups, you have an athlete here. And so he thinks that, we finally have an MLB Indian American.
So a lot of people ask me, how did I include the people I've included in my book? And I have not included academics. Obviously, Abhijit is not in it for that reasen. Otherwise, there'd be Amartya Sen. There's a whole lot of people. I have limited it to tech, medicine, and public policy. And, the field is too vast, and I wanted to write about fields that had been transformational in this country, where Indians have had a transformational impact. And I've chosen Indians who I felt have had a transformational impact within those industries. And I've explained it in the book. And I've excluded the arts because there's no one, there's Salman Rushdie, there's no one in the arts per se that have transformed literature as a whole. So, and he hasn't transformed sports right now.
He has, I wouldn't say he's a genius, but I will say this. This is a genius of a book. It is, and one last comment about this book. Yes, it is a set of amazing profiles with powerful context, Meena's deep research and brilliant writing stitching it all together. But what I found also really fascinating was it takes us into some untold histories of people who have been transformative in these various fields. But in the Sid Mukherjee chapter, it takes us into cancer research in ways that just allows us to go deep in various fields. So for me, it was a gift to read this, and I encourage you after this to grab the book. Thank you, Meena.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll have a short Q&A from the audience. If anyone wants to ask the author and Rajiv any questions, let us know. So apologize, we just have one mic, so.
Is this on? Yeah. I have a very simple question. You've interviewed all these people. So what should Indian Americans do to get a better voice?
Who is the question for?
You.
No, not Not necessarily.
It's for you.
Well, I think that I think someone asked me in New York 3 days ago that they said that we've been told to keep our heads low, and what do you think about that? And I said, I don't believe that that's what we should do. I think it's really important to speak your mind, and to say what you think, and say what you believe in. Otherwise, what's the point of living? And if you should always do what you think is right. And whether it's writing an op-ed, or whether it's writing a letter to your congressman or to your senator, or whatever it is, or supporting financially the side that you believe in, it doesn't matter whether it's right or left, but you should do what you believe in. And if you see injustice, stand up for it.
Thank you. I think there was someone here.
Thank you. My question was really about the lessons you have. Do you think Genius is going to continue as it has? The circumstances under which these geniuses thrived, do you believe that we can continue to have that in generations that are currently, arising? So are there lessons that what we should keep and what we should change? That's for you.
So I'm a little bit old-fashioned in that I do believe that education is really important, and keeping the values of education and family. One of the things that you see in all the statistics is that Indians are amongst the highest group economically, education-wise, but also where the families have remained intact. And obviously, one shouldn't stay that way if it's not feasible, but I think supportive families and an emphasis on education is important, but not with the danda on the head, because what I have found and what I've learned, contrary to my own previous understanding, is that all these people in the book had a freedom of choice and being able to be creative. I mean, Shantanu Narayan and Satya Nadella didn't get into IIT. That's not the only path. As a matter of fact, their parents, in Shantanu's case, his older brother was the star. And in Satya Nadella's case, his father was Israeli Prime Minister's office and high achieved. Mother was a Sanskrit scholar and, very high achieving family. And he was sort of not doing well in school. And his father was concerned that he may not, his father was actually quite worried and upset that Shantanu wasn't stepping up to the plate. But he said, my mother just loved me and wanted me to be happy. And that gave him a great deal of self-confidence and the ability to explore and be himself. So it's taught me a lot, because it makes me realize that giving a child a sense of confidence in themselves and their ability to be creative, because once they find what they're interested in, his father bought him a computer when he was 15 and he got so hooked that then he became obsessive about computers. But part of it is finding what you're interested in.
Thank you so much for a wonderful book and a wonderful presentation. My question is a little bit more challenging. So I think we should celebrate success. That's a very American rah-rah thing. But I've been living in this country 50 years, and I've enjoyed every moment of it. However, I think the narrative is changing. It's changing about Indian Americans, especially the people who don't come in with IIT degrees, etc. And even the IIT guys, for the first time that track, you went and did computer science at a good university and all that. So it's important to engage with the new reality. It's important to celebrate what's happened. And I personally think Indians of all stripes are more vulnerable now than at any point in the 50 years. So I'd like to hear both your opinions on that. you can just read it. It's in the headlines. I mean, what's happening on social media reaches a certain threshold. All it takes is somebody to take, like that truck driver in Florida, I'm not defending him, just a few things like that, and everything changes. There are plenty of people who are willing to latch on to, hey, what the hell why are these Indians doing so well? What have they done? My father came and he did this, that, the other. These people don't deserve it. And so that's also part of the reality.
Yeah, so I follow these. Part of my job is to keep track of the H-1B conversation. And I've seen, my husband thinks I'm crazy, but I go on all the blogs, and the rise in racism and vitriolic nastiness about Indians has really risen, which wasn't there before. And I think a lot of it began with this Marco Erles, who said all those hateful things about Indians, and he was fired, and then J.D. Vance rehired him. And kudos to Ro Khanna for standing up and calling him out on it and saying that he should be ashamed of himself given that he has Indian children. And then, J.D. Vance responds on Twitter by saying, the only thing that would worry me is being a congressman like you from California. It was crazy. They had this horrible exchange. But Marco Erles, nevertheless, was rehired despite all his racist attacks against Indians. And I feel like this administration has given permission for people for being racist against Indians. And I found that surprising number of hatred has come out of Texas for some reason, particularly around this Allen and Plano and this whole area, about how there are no white faces in my neighborhood. Anyway, it's just really sort of shocking. I'm saying, give them this book and show them how much contribution the Indians have made. I think we have to just keep digging it into the head. So when they say, that's why I make this point every time I go and I have an opportunity or a platform to speak, that the Indians came in 1965 because there was a need from this country. It wasn't just that we came in looking for a job or something. There was a need in this country. There was a need for doctors in the rural areas. There was a supply and demand, but it was driven by a need in this country for our skills. And just because, all of a sudden you think you can take over, it's just not true. The evidence isn't there. But this is not driven by any rational, fact-based, feelings. These are emotional things where we're going through a difficult phase in this country. And I think if you just sit back and cower, I think you have to just present the facts in a rational way, not in a heated way, but just be patient and with temperance, and hope that this will pass and that the midterm elections will bring in different people. I don't know. I think two wrongs don't make a right, and I don't know if aggression actually is going to win the argument. I look at Vivek Murthy, listen to that thing that I think all these things stem from insecurity. These reactions stem from a great deal of, there's a wonderful book called Strangers in Their Own Land by Arlie Hochschild, which is a book where white men particularly have felt that they've been bypassed by blacks, bypassed by minorities, bypassed by women. And so they're lashing out. I think Indians have done very well in this country, and I think if you acknowledge that right away with people and say, yeah, we have done well, this country's been great, but frankly, there's not a single person. I always start out a lot of my conversations by saying, there's no one in this audience. Now here we're all Indian, but a lot of my audiences are not all Indian, and I often say, there's no one here that is not an immigrant unless you're Native American. And you can go back 1 generation or 10 generations or 5 generations, but every one of you has immigrants in your family, including President Trump, whose 2 wives are immigrants. So, and J.D. Vance, whose wife is Indian. So, let's be honest here. This is a country that is all immigrants. So, I think you have to knock their arguments down, but by facts and not by getting angry. I think honey is always better than than vinegar.
That's lovely. That's a great saying. We'll have one more question, the gentleman in the back, and then we'll close the session.
It's probably more of a comment than a question, but he raises an important point. We as a community have been extremely successful in this country in material terms. We haven't told our stories. I've lived in Kentucky for 4 years. I've lived in Texas for 3 years. You go and talk to an average Joe in Middle America, they'll probably identify 1 or 2 stories of Indians that they know. We've gone through tons of struggles. People have come with $8 in their pockets and become prominent figures. Kamala Harris, daughter of 2 immigrants, gone on to become extremely successful. I talk to people in the Valley. I'm a filmmaker now. I used to be a techie. I'm a filmmaker. I talk to people in the Valley, people who will write $1 million checks for something that I can tell is never going to work. And I go to them saying, hey, here's a great story of an Indian immigrant. I'm making a movie. And they're like, I don't understand this business. I'm not going to write a check. And I think that attitude needs to change because we are extremely successful. The resentment is building up because they don't know what struggles we've gone through to come here and to become who we are. So I would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Well, I agree with you.
That's why you wrote the book.
Yeah, the book says it. So find some characters in the book and you can maybe make a movie about them. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Meenakshi and Rajiv. So the authors will be there in the courtyard for book signing in case you all want to see and talk. 100%. It's going on mine. Thank you.